Hi everyone, welcome back to What a Time to Be Alive. My name's Amu, and today we're going to talk about the State of the Union address. So let's get started. So the State of the Union address happened just a little over a week ago, and I'm sure most of you heard about it or maybe even watched it, but it's basically something that presidents do just to let the public and Congress know the progress that their administration has made over the course of the term so far. And I thought this one was pretty significant because there's a lot of misconceptions or maybe assumptions that people had made about Trump and what his presidency would be like. And they most likely didn't expect some of the things that were happening and maybe some of the things they did. But of the things said, it did create like an overwhelmingly positive view of the state of the union as a whole. But there's a lot of things that were said that really didn't have enough context to them to be entirely true. And there's some things that could be or were presented in a way that was a little shady and not really painting the whole picture of things. So I just kind of wanted to go over some of those points because it is hard to distinguish when you're being told stuff from the president, like what could be true and what's entirely not factual. But there's just some things that, sound great and they may be great, but there's more to the story. And I think this administration, with what Trump was saying during his speech, is taking credit for a little bit more than what there really is. And one example of that is that President Trump, quote, said, "Since the election, we've created 2.4 million new jobs, including 200,000 new jobs in manufacturing alone," end quote. And this is correct, but you have to remember he said since the election, and the election occurred in November of 2016, which is technically still Obama's term. So it's like carrying over from that. And since the election, there's been 169,000 jobs added per month, approximately on average, but it's still less than the amount that was added previously during Obama's term, which was around 185,000. 2.4 more jobs is always a good thing, but I think you kind of get the idea of how some of the quotes and things that he said really, like with the context that I just gave you, it makes you look at the situation quite differently. So something else, African American unemployment. This was one of like the biggest points that a lot of people really held on to and kind of echoed later on. And it's that African American unemployment rate has been the lowest that it's ever been recorded as. And this is actually, it's like completely true that it is, but it's also part of a trend that we've been seeing over the years. Black unemployment rate has been going down for the past few years. So obviously I think it would be lowest at the time when you're reporting it later on. But it's kind of it's the result of the trend so far. It's not just because of the administration that it's that the rate has been going down for so long. And another question that you can kind of ask about this is that it is Trump's first term in office. So as far as economically, it takes a long time for the economy to like show a specific trend or, have a result from something like a new administration. And since it's just his first term, and his first year in his first term, there's a question of how much someone can actually like take credit for that. And so I think the way that he phrased it was a little shady, and I don't think it's entirely because of the administration that there is. Something else, Trump claimed that there was stagnation in how wages are done. For example, he said that essentially like wages weren't growing and were maybe being like stifled, like their growth was being stifled. But it's actually not true, because wages now in his term are not rising at the same rate that they were under President Obama. Like they're actually rising at a slower rate now than they were in Obama's term. So that's another thing that wasn't true. And while we're on the topic of economic growth, I think it's important to note that there was a claim that was made from Trump where he said that Chrysler was going to move one of their manufacturing locations from that's currently in Mexico into Michigan. And it's in a way true, like partially, but not entirely the whole story. So basically, it's true that they are opening a new plant in Michigan, but it's actually going to be done without the other one closing. So the Mexico plant will still be open and functioning, and there will just be a new location in Michigan as well. So the way that he phrased it, he said, quote, "Chrysler is moving a major plant from Mexico to Michigan," end quote. And I think the move part of it makes it seem like the workers of the Mexican location will be terminated and that plant will no longer be in use. But it's entirely, like, it's not the same, but I guess that one is like partially almost true. It's kind of vague in phrasing. So moving on from the economic part of the State of the Union address, another major part of the country's conflicts that Trump addressed was immigration reform. And that has been a center of Trump's whole campaign and presidency since his campaign started, I believe in 2015 or maybe end of 2014. And it has been centered a lot around protecting America from immigration that's illegal and leads to problems in the U.S., whether it's security problems, economic insecurity for people who are American, and so on and so forth. So the way that he presented it during the address is that there would be a 4-pillar plan, which he says is a detailed proposal that should be supported by both parties as a fair compromise. And those of you who watched the State of the Union address know that the Democrats really didn't stand for anything, and if they did try to stand, then Nancy Pelosi was wagging her finger at them and was no, you need to sit back down. I mean, they didn't even stand for the fact that African American unemployment rate is the lowest that it's ever been, which I didn't understand. Apparently, if a Democrat says it, it's fine to stand up, but if a Republican says it, they just can't agree, which that's just not how politics works, and that's not how a country's run. So, back to the immigration plan. The first pillar is a plan that would offer citizenship for 1.8 million illegal immigrants who were brought here by their parents at a young age. It gives them a chance at citizenship. And it basically covers more than the around 800,000 that was secured under the previous administration, which is Obama's. And the way that you could secure citizenship through this plan is by showing that you are of a certain merit standing and a certain legal or social standing, and that you have good morals and aren't in trouble with the law and that kind of stuff. The second pillar that he went on about was the wall, which is another thing that is maybe the most known part of Trump's election and immigration plan since the election, is building a wall on the southern border to prevent people from coming in illegally from Mexico and other southern countries. So there was some confusion about the wall part of it, just because the intention of the wall is unclear to some people. The whole idea behind it is that it would prevent illegal immigration, but the problem is that most of the people who get in illegally get in from areas that already are secured by walls or fences. But the thing is that the National Security Administration, I believe, says that the wall would actually help Border Patrol secure the area that they are guarding better, and it would prevent illegal immigration somehow. So it might be because of the fact that one uniform wall would kind of get rid of, some places with walls, some places with fences, and that kind of thing. But even then, it's the whole intent of that hasn't really been completely laid out. So it's, I guess, a suggestion, but I don't see that really happening and being a compromise between Democrats and Republicans. The third pillar was, I believe, completely unjustified, and it really made the president seem kind of uneducated on this matter. So he said the third pillar is supposed to end the visa lottery, and according to Trump, it's a program that, quote, randomly hands out green cards without any regard for skill, merit, or the safety of our people. But in reality, the visa lottery actually looks into a lot of things before they do give the visa to somebody. So according to the State Department, in an 18-page guide, applicants to the visa lottery program need to have a high school education or 2 years of work experience in the past 5 years, which requires 2 years of training or experience. Then, in addition to that, the applicant must undergo a medical exam and can't have a criminal record at all. And then if they are selected after the application process, then they're subjected to a very extensive background check that can last for months on end before they are granted entry into the state or into the country. And it isn't randomly given out. It's given out to 50,000 applicants to people in countries that don't have a very high immigration rate to the U.S. to begin with. So the whole thing that Trump said about what it is, it's like completely false. And for a second, I was like, there's no way. When you're listening to it, you just can't believe that that's what happens. There's no way we just randomly hand out visas to people for no reason. Because, I have relatives in countries like in Asian countries, and it's so hard for them to get a visa here. It's hard for a lot of people that are just like completely normal people to get visas into the U.S. So it doesn't really make sense anyway when you're listening to it to think like, oh, wow, I can't believe that's actually a program where we just hand people access to the country without any sort of background check. And that was like completely wrong. And yeah, the whole third pillar part, I just don't understand. I don't really see the point in eliminating that program because there hasn't really been a problem that's come from someone who was a result of the visa lottery program, I don't think. Or even if it was, I would highly doubt that they would go without mentioning that in order to support the claim of why it needs to be removed or canceled, like they did with the fourth pillar, which is ending something called chain migration. And Trump said it's to protect the nuclear family. And basically it's saying that one immigrant can virtually bring in like unlimited amounts of relatives, and which isn't really true, but I can see how that would be a problem. It's almost like an unfair way. I've heard stories about where people will like marry their own siblings just to like bring them over, and then that way they would be citizens. But I don't think it's like a widespread issue to the point where there needs to be so much concern over it. But anyway, it's still misleading about how it was, set up. So for us, when I immigrated, we had to have our grandparents apply for a green card in order to bring them in here. We can't just, bring anyone in for no reason. And so even if they do petition to bring in relatives, people with green cards, if they do ask for their relatives to be let in, there's no guarantee. There's still background checks and criminal history checks that have to go into it before they're allowed into the country, just as they would do with the visa lottery program, except I don't think there's a medical exam or anything like that involved. There's also limits on the number of immigrants, married children, and adult siblings. And, adult siblings that can sponsor for a visa. There's apparently, as of November 1st, there's about more than 3.9 million people waiting in line for a visa to come here. And people who filed or petitioned for a visa way back in 2004, which is 14 years ago, are just now, like this month, starting to get their papers reviewed and processed. So it's important to remember that there's a lot of things that go on before someone's invited to the country. And yes, there's always things that are missed, but I think some of the pillars of this program, I think there was just not really a huge basis on putting in so much money into fixing them. Illegal immigration, yes, but in that case, it would have been smarter, I think, to focus on how background checks are done, and if there's a way that they can tighten up who is allowed in without just banning or getting rid of like these programs, which are already so slow and so extensive. But anyway, that's just my opinion. So I think that's the two major things that I wanted to talk about for the State of the Union address, because I think economic policy and immigration policy are like the two most well-known parts of Trump's administration and his opinions that most people know. So in addition to the State of the Union address, something that just ended a few days ago was the government shutdown. And I think a lot of people are confused about what causes these. And basically it happens when there's a conflict in getting a budget approved for the government. And without an approved budget, there's a lot of the government shuts down because there's no allocation of money or like what they can use and all of that. So the result is that the government just shuts down. It just, like, no one comes to work. And a lot of people were, you can like blame the president for it, but in actuality, it pretty much happens all the time. It definitely did happen under Obama, I think, in both of his terms. So it's definitely not a Republican thing, which, I mean, immediately, I remember this because we were going over this in my government class, and someone immediately goes, "Oh my God, thanks, Trump." Like, and they were serious. It wasn't like a joking thing. They were completely serious about the fact that it was Trump's fault. And I just went, dude, it happened under Obama too. It's not a Republican thing. Not everything happens because someone's a Republican. So as far as the shutdown goes, this was our second shutdown that happened in the last 3 weeks. And the first one happened on January 20th. And it happens when there's no budget for Congress to run, as I just said. But it's kind of unusual, I think, that there was two in the span of 3 weeks. But it happened on Friday the 9th at 12:01 a.m. The budget, actually, that was approved at the end of January that got us out of the last shutdown ran out. And so it didn't last very long. This one that just happened on Friday, it was incredibly short. But everyone's blaming Rand Paul, who's a senator, for not approving the budget, which kind of led to the shutdown in general. So maybe he is to blame, but honestly, in every situation, I think there needs to be someone to blame, or people always want there to be someone to blame, just so there's a scapegoat for everything that happens. There's a reason that someone can point to for why something happened. The reason that people were blaming Rand Paul is because he was delaying the vote on the funding bill, which kind of messed up the timeline for Congress. And that basically is the reason why people are blaming him. But the shutdown, literally, it happened like overnight. Pretty much everyone was sleeping. It was like really late at night. There's a picture of like Mitch McConnell carrying in pizzas for people since it was such a long night and it was very late. But it ultimately ended up passing, and we came out of it pretty much the same day. And yeah, I think that's all I really have for this episode. I just kind of wanted to clear up what causes a government shutdown and why it happens, because I don't think anyone really knows. And when you hear government shutdown, it's like you're just like, oh my god, like how can the government just shut down? Like who goes to work? Like what happens? But yeah, it doesn't always happen because of the president. That's not what it is. It's just budgeting issues. That's what causes it. And yeah, so thanks for tuning in, guys. And it's been real. And I will be back in, I guess, 2 weeks on another Sunday. So bye.